Hello everybody, hello. I hope all is well with you. So today I'm going to be reading The Ghostly Tales of Connecticut by Ellie O'Ryan. Welcome to the spooky streets of Connecticut. Stay alert, ghosts lurk around every corner. Even the most unexpected places might be haunted by wandering phantoms. Did you know that Charles Island may still hold a cursed treasure from Captain Kidd? Or that there's a headless horseman terrorizing Canton? Can you believe spirits swirl throughout all of Mystic Seaport? Pulled right from history, these ghostly tales will change the way you see Connecticut and have you sleeping with the light on. Introduction. Connecticut is a state filled with natural wonders from forests and mountains to rivers and waterfalls. It's a state steeped in history from its Native American heritage to its status as one of the original 13 colonies and the site of many important Revolutionary War battles. It's also a state renowned for supernatural happenings and otherworldly haunts. Connecticut has more legends and folklore than any other state in New England. Perhaps there is something about the landscape that causes supernatural occurrences to happen so often there. Or perhaps it's something about the state's rich history. Spirits find themselves trapped to their past lives, unable to move on to the next world. They linger on, perhaps with unfinished business that haunts them. Perhaps with a story that they long to tell someone, anyone who might listen. Lost lovers who long to be reunited, witches who torment the countryside, soldiers whose blood soaked into Connecticut soil, a mysterious hound with a message of doom, a headless horseman who gallops down the road with a burning fury and an uncompleted mission, a hideout that holds a secret history. A cemetery, a swamp, a buried treasure, a haunted island, and a pirate's curse. They're all waiting for you in the Nutmeg State. They're waiting for you in the pages of this book, too. Chapter 1. The Green Lady. It's a long road to the Seventh-day Baptist Cemetery, a road with twists and turns, a road with some bumps and some bends. It's also a road with its very own ghost. She's called the Green Lady. The Green Lady walks the road each night, back and forth, surrounded by a green mist that glows softly in the darkness. Some who have seen the Green Lady say that her dress, an elegant shade of emerald green, looks as beautiful as it did the day she died wearing it. Others say that her dress isn't green at all. They've seen the Green Lady covered in muck and mire from the swamp where she died. The slimy tendrils trail behind her but never leave a mark in the road. In life, her name was Elizabeth Palmiter. We know that she was 30 years old when she died. We know when she died on April 12th, 1800. What we don't know exactly is how she died. There are a few stories about her untimely end. This is one of them. Winter had lasted longer than anyone had expected, but at last the warm sun was shining. Finally, the tiny green leaves had begun to unfurl on the trees. Snowdrops and crocuses peeked out of the dirt, whispering a promise of all the flowers yet to bloom. Elizabeth Palmiter couldn't wait. There were other things that couldn't wait either. Chores at the sprawling house where she shared with her husband Matthew needed attention, and there was a long list of supplies that they needed from town. They decided to divide and conquer. Matthew would journey to town while Elizabeth stayed home to begin spring cleaning. Their separation that day would prove to be fatal. Elizabeth waved from the porch as Matthew began the walk down the winding road, past the swamp and the cemetery. Then she pushed up the sleeves of her pretty green dress. It was Matthew's favorite. He always said it brought out the green in her eyes, and got right to work. First, Elizabeth opened the windows to give the house a good airing. There was nothing like the sweet springtime air, and kept herself busy with baking. 2 loaves of bread, a pie, a cake. The pie she cooled on the windowsill. It smelled delicious, but she couldn't have a bite. She wouldn't have a bite, not even a nibble of the crust, until Matthew returned, as they could enjoy it together. Then Elizabeth turned her attention to the chores. Dusting and sweeping, mending and folding. She was so busy she didn't notice at first that the light had begun to dim unusually early. When she shivered, she reached for a shawl, but soon the wind was gusting with such force that even Elizabeth couldn't ignore it any longer. When she glanced outside, Elizabeth was shocked to see the heavy gray sky and the thick clouds that had blocked the sun. Even the branches of the trees seemed to be shivering. Or perhaps they were trembling, afraid of what was to come. Elizabeth ran through the house, closing one window after another against the chill. She needed to bring in more wood for the fire, to put the heavy quilts back on the bed, but first the pie. She reached the kitchen window and pulled in the pie just as the first snowflakes started falling. In minutes, the ground was covered with a thin white layer. If only that had been all, she wouldn't have worried quite so much. But the snow grew heavier and Matthew still wasn't home. Elizabeth wrapped another shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. She should have seen Blossom dancing on a gentle breeze, not hard, glittering snowflakes swirling on a wind that seemed almost angry. There was no denying it. An April blizzard had struck. With her here at home, and Matthew, where was he? In town? Safe at the store? Or already on the road? Matthew, she might have whispered as worry gnawed at her heart. She paced the porch, watching the road until the snow had piled so high that she could no longer distinguish it from the rest of the landscape. Was Matthew trudging home to her on the snow-packed road? As the sky darkened and night loomed, with not even moon nor stars for light, she couldn't bear the thought. Elizabeth reached inside the house for 2 things, her warm woolen cloak and the lantern they kept by the door. She'd set off for town and meet Matthew on the road. Together with the light of the lantern, they'd find their way home, where the fire would be crackling and supper waiting for them to share it. The pie, of course, was for dessert. And like shards of ice, the snowflakes stung as they pelted her cheeks, but Elizabeth forged ahead. Her feet felt the cold keenly, even through her boots. Soon her toes went numb, and she stumbled with almost every step. Not even the trusty lantern could shine brightly enough to cut through the swirling snow. Elizabeth paused. A momentary flash of doubt plagued her. Was she still on the road? Was she still headed toward town? There were turns in the road, especially near the swamp, but Elizabeth had walked this road so many times. Surely she would know, surely she would sense it, if she went astray. She might have, too, if her feet hadn't been so numb from the cold. She would have noticed the swamp water as it seeped through the soles of her boots, but Elizabeth didn't feel the water until it reached her calves. The iciness of it made her gasp. Her heart was pounding, but Elizabeth took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. It was just a misstep, just a wrong turn. She'd turn around and right herself, get back on the path, find Matthew. But with her next step, Elizabeth's foot plunged into the thick, cloying mud. She tried to pull up her leg, but the swamp wouldn't give it up. With a sickening, sucking noise, her leg suddenly pulled free, leaving her boot behind. The freezing mud had hardened like cement. Her boot was lost to it. Limping, Elizabeth tried to take another step, but the swamp waters only deepened. She turned one way, then the other, searching for a landmark, a sign, a familiar sight that might tell her where she was. That might tell her which way to go. The swamp waters crept up her woolen cloak, making it so heavy that she felt like it was dragging her down. She shrugged it off, but the waters were seeping into her dress, too. Her pretty green dress. It wasn't so bright now. It wasn't so pretty anymore. Matthew, she might have cried, but the howling wind snatched away her voice so that no one ever heard the last word she spoke. For his part, Matthew was warm and dry in town. He'd spotted the storm's sudden approach and had the good sense to stay the night at the inn. The fire was roaring, and a thick, hearty stew bubbled in the stew pot. Such unexpected April snow squalls wouldn't last long. Matthew knew. He felt certain he'd be on his way home to Elizabeth at first light. Of course, the journey home took him longer than usual. The sun was shining brightly once more, transforming the thick drifts of snow into slushy puddles. He whistled a little, eager to see his bride after their night apart. It was the dress he saw first, unmistakable, the green dress, the only one like it in the county. Why, he wondered, was Elizabeth's favorite dress floating in the middle of the swamp? Then he saw the strands of auburn hair, the feet, one in a stocking, one in a boot. That's when, with a crushing sense of grief, Matthew knew that he would never see Elizabeth again. He was only half right, though. The Elizabeth he'd known in life, his love, was gone forever. But that very night, the Green Lady rose from the swamp to continue searching for the man she loved. Rambling up and down the road to town, a pleasant smile flickering on her face. Surely they'd meet soon, just a bit farther perhaps, just around the bend. And so she has traveled the road for more than 200 years, still searching for her husband. Even though he departed this earthly realm long, long ago, some who have seen the Green Lady in their travels have sworn they've seen the ghost of Matthew too, searching for his wife. But if both spirits have been traversing the same stretch of road, past the cemetery, past the swamp, past their old home, how come they still haven't found each other? Will they ever? Chapter 2. The Black Dog of the Hanging Hills. The Hanging Hills are a mountain range that includes the town of Meridian. For hundreds of years, people have visited the Hanging Hills to appreciate their rare natural beauty. From the rivers and reservoirs that contain clear, cool water to the unique rock formations made from volcanic rock, people aren't the only ones drawn to the Hanging Hills, though. There are many common creatures that inhabit the Hanging Hills mountain range. Squirrels, chipmunks, deer, rabbits, owls, and hawks. There is also an extraordinarily uncommon creature who dwells within the Hanging Hills, the black dog. This, of course, no ordinary dog, but a strange and otherworldly beast that has been spotted in the Hanging Hills for more than a century. It is not especially large, nor especially fearsome. When the black dog opens its mouth, no sound comes out, not a bark, not a howl, not a growl. Just a strange, spooky mist that rises into the air and hangs there quivering until it fades into nothingness. The black dog has roamed the Hanging Hills for so long that many hikers, explorers, and naturalists have seen it and lived to tell the tale. At least some of them did. In 1898, a young geologist named W.H.C. Pynchon set off on an expedition to study the unique rock formations of the Hanging Hills. His studies at Harvard had prepared him well for field work in the mountain range. Or so he thought. While Pynchon hiked the trails of the West Peak, he suddenly had the strangest sense that he was being followed. He hadn't seen anyone else in the hills, no hikers or naturalists or picnickers. There was just peace and quiet, and that unshakable sense that someone or something was behind him. Pynchon rubbed his neck. He wouldn't turn around to look. That would be foolish, and he was a man of science. He believed in facts and truth, ideas that were sturdy as the rocks he had dedicated his life studying. And yet, with every step, the feeling grew. It was nonsense. Pynchon knew, but he couldn't stop himself. At last, he turned around and spotted a hound in the middle of the trail. Pinchon let out a short bark of a laugh. He was more relieved than he wanted to admit. After all, imagining that something was following him wasn't his style. Besides, he liked dogs. Pinchon bent forward with his hands on his knees and whistled. Maybe he called out, "Here, pup, here, doggy." Unlike all the other dogs Pinchon had befriended over the years, the black dog didn't move. Perhaps it was shy. Perhaps it had spent its whole life alone in the hanging hills and was unfamiliar with the friendship that could grow between a man and his dog. Pinchon decided to walk a little farther and see if the dog would follow. It did. Pinchon didn't mind. He was pleased to have a little company on the journey, even if the shy dog seemed to keep its distance. It was a fine-looking creature, just the right size for a dog, and well-behaved too. Not once did Pinchon notice it bark at a squirrel or stray from the path to chase a rabbit through the brush. By late afternoon, Pinchon's knapsack had grown heavy with samples, and his feet had begun to ache. Darkness was falling. It would be best to leave the mountainside before it got too late. Even as he began his descent, the dog kept pace with him. As Pinchon reached the edge of the wooded area, he wondered if his new friend would continue to accompany him. He almost hoped it would. Over just the course of a few hours, he'd grown fond of the dog. He wouldn't mind its company on a regular basis. He turned around to whistle for the pup to come, only to see the large gap had grown between them. The black dog was just beyond the tree line, waiting, watching. Pinchon decided to try one more time. He whistled and softly snapped his fingers. "Here, pup, come here." The black dog cocked its head and stared straight at Pinchon. Then it lifted its head to the sky and howled, but no sound came out of its mouth, just a faint whiff of vapor that spread through the air like a contagion. Pinchon frowned. It was chilly, but not so cold the dog's breath should form such a cloud. He'd never known a dog to be voiceless before, but he supposed it was possible. He walked forward, glancing occasionally over his shoulder, only to see the black dog disappear among the trees. It would be 3 years before Pinchon returned to the Hanging Hills. This time he brought a friend. Herbert Marshall was a geologist too. He worked for the U.S. Geological Survey. Marshall was no stranger to the wonders of the Hanging Hills. He'd journeyed there many times before, and Pinchon was looking forward to traveling with an expert. He was also looking forward to seeing if the black dog still roamed the mountainside. The night before they began their ascent into the Hanging Hills, the two travelers shared a meal at the inn where they were staying. Pinchon ventured to tell Marshall about the black dog he had seen on his last journey. "I know that dog," Marshall may have replied, with a note of excitement in his voice. "He's famous, you know." "Is he?" Pinchon asked. He sipped his piping hot coffee. "The black dog of the Hanging Hills," Marshall said. "Legend has it that the first time you view him, good fortune awaits. After the second viewing, the shadow of misfortune hangs over you. And after the third sight of the black dog..." Marshall's voice trailed off. "What happens?" Pinchon prompted him. "You die," Marshall replied. A look of alarm must have crossed Pinchon's face, for Marshall chuckled and clapped his friend on the back. "It's only a legend, a tale to frighten children around the campfire. I've seen the black dog twice before, and I've no worries, not a one." Pinchon laughed too. "I can't say I recall any examples of good fortune after I saw the beast," he replied. "I'm sure you're right. A tall tale and nothing more." The next morning dawned bitterly cold, but the skies were clear. That was a blessing, Pinchon thought. Wintertime mountain treks were possible with the appropriate supplies, but poor weather made them too treacherous to undertake the risk. The friends didn't say much as they scaled the south side of the West Peak. Snow had accumulated in the cracks and crevices of the mountainside. Once again, Pinchon was grateful to follow in the footsteps of such an experienced mountaineer. The higher they climbed, the deeper the crevices. Some were so shadowy that Pynchon had a feeling they would hold tight to the snow within them all year long. Even through the fiercest summer heat, Pynchon stared deep into the crevices and felt for the briefest moment that he was staring into the valley of the shadow of death he had read about so often in the Bible. He was about to mention it to Marshall when his friend suddenly stopped. "I see it," Marshall may have said. "The black dog." Pynchon looked up and saw it too. The black dog stood at the top of the summit, staring down upon them. Its eyes gleamed just slightly in the cold gray light. The black dog opened its mouth, perhaps to yawn, perhaps to sigh, and the vapor trailed out, twisting into the sky. The beast made no noise. There was a sound, though, a garbled sort of choking noise, as if one's throat had spasmed from fear. Pynchon turned to Marshall in concern, only to see that his friend's face had gone, deathly pale. "I did not believe it before, but I believe it now," Marshall said in a strangled-sounding voice. Even as the words escaped from Marshall's mouth, Pynchon heard something new, the sound of rock rolling on rock. What happened next was over in an instant, yet seemed to take interminably long. It was a series of moments that Pynchon would relive again and again in the years to come. Marshall's eyes widened, his arms flailed, his mouth formed the shape of a perfect O, but like the black dog, no sound came out. Then, as the rocks under his feet continued to roll away, Marshall plunged down the mountainside. It was over so fast. "Marshall!" Pynchon must have screamed, his voice high and hollow. The only sound was the bone-chilling rattle of rocks tumbling down the mountainside. Pynchon cried out for his friend again, but once more there was no response. The black dog stood above, watching in silence. Pynchon knew one thing, and one thing only, in those first terrible moments following Marshall's fall. He needed to get help, and he needed to get it now. Climbing as carefully and as cautiously as he could, Pynchon somehow managed to safely descend the west peak. He ran, stumbling to the nearest guidepost. Breathing heavily, the words escaped in staccato. "My friend, fall, West Peak." A sympathetic soul put a blanket around Pynchon's shoulders. Someone pressed a cup of tea into his hands, but he was shaking so much it spilled on the floor. He sat quietly as a search party was organized. As they were about to depart, Pynchon rose to his feet. "I want to come," he might have said. "Best to let the rescue squad search for your friend," the ranger told him, firmly but kindly. "We have experience with rescues in the Hanging Hills. You've had a shock. Stay and rest." Pynchon didn't argue. He wanted to help search for Marshall and bring him back to the inn, but he already knew he wouldn't be much use. As it turned out, the search for Marshall wasn't much use either. They followed Pynchon's directions to the letter and found Marshall's body, bent and broken, at the bottom of the ravine. As best they could tell, he had died instantly. The black dog watched as the rescuers carried the dead man home. It would be 6 long years before Pynchon returned to the Hanging Hills. 6 years of distance, 6 years of forgetting. After all, he was a man of science. Pynchon didn't let children's tales stand between him and his work. He didn't want to let his project in the Hanging Hills go unfinished for the rest of his career. Not much had changed since his last visit to the Hanging Hills, but Pynchon pushed the memories from his mind. Still, at some elemental level, he knew that his choice was not without risk. The night before his final journey up the mountainside, he sat alone in his room and wrote the following words: "I must die sometime. When I am gone, this paper may be of interest to those who remain, for in throwing light on the manner of my death, it will also throw light on the end of the many victims that the old volcanic hills have claimed." What happened to Pynchon next is a mystery that no man living will ever uncover. We know that he never returned to the inn where he was staying. We know that it would be many weeks before his body was found, frozen solid in the same place where Marshall had died 6 years before. There were no witnesses to Pynchon's fall or his death, except perhaps the black dog. So I'm going to stop after the second chapter for today. In my next video, I'll read a few more chapters. I hope I was able to get you to relax and maybe put you to sleep with a story. Or maybe scared you, who knows. Until the next video, everybody, take care and sleep tight.